Now, we have breaking news closer to home now, live to Andrew Clennell. Andrew, you have the date of the Cook by-election. Yeah,
April 13. He had to juggle the Speaker, Milton Dick. He needed it before the school holidays, didn't want it around Easter either. So Labor aren't expected to run for the seat. April 13 is the Cook by-election date, and that means Simon Kennedy will probably be being elected if there's not a strong independent to take him on. He ran for Bennelong last time, even though he was living in Maroubra, so he's really sort of gone around the world to get himself a seat, Simon Kennedy.
Well, lucky him, he's landed in the Shire, God's country.
I thought you might say something like that. Weren't they after you to run, Laura? No, just kidding. But look, it is good in a way to get that done and dusted before budget, but it's not going to be the exciting contest that Dunkley or Aston was.
The women issue is still a massive issue, and look, I think it has been talked about behind closed doors again this time. It's really hard to understand how they just don't go through a temporary quota system. Say, look, we don't have enough women in Parliament. The pre-selections aren't throwing up more women candidates that are in a successful position. Just have a quota for a couple of years.
I think a big factor in this is the New South Wales Liberal Party at war with itself. Yeah. So in the Labor Party, they were able to get a lot of pre-selections through their national executive to meet their quota or to get... I'm sure Peter Dutton would like more female candidates, even if he wouldn't want a quota. So really, he needs to kind of do a deal with Matt Keane, it seems to me. Like, that's the way forward. I mean, he wouldn't want to do that because his supporters in the right of the party would hate that. But if you want someone who can bring you numbers to achieve those sorts of outcomes, that's probably his best bet. The New South Wales Liberal Party, we saw Don Harwin elected president by just one vote against like a Tony Abbott-backed candidate on the weekend. It shows again that they're at war, and that could be a significant problem for Peter Dutton come the next election if he wants certain candidates. We've seen that with Melissa McIntosh under threat and Lindsay. If you don't have that sorted, it's a third of the House of Representatives seats. It's a major problem if you want to hit government.
Yeah, Anne Ruston too. She's in the Senate in South Australia. She is seemingly under pressure as well. Anyway, let's talk nuclear. I thought it was fascinating to hear from Chris Bowen yesterday. And also my interview with David Littleproud this morning. There's a lot of details to be worked out here. And I'm not sure the coalition has all the answers at the moment either.
Oh, what was fascinating too was Ted O'Brien on Sunday Agenda saying a nuclear reactor could be built in 10 years.
The best experts around the world with whom we've been engaging, Andrew, are saying Australia could have nuclear up and running within a 10-year period. Now, there's no doubt that a workforce is key.
Tell him he's dreaming. I mean, I don't know what experts he's talking to. The United States, with a very developed regulatory regime, with a very developed nuclear industry, the nuclear leader of the world. The average build time of a nuclear power plant in the United States has been 19 years.
Right, well, Ted O'Brien has spoken to experts in the US, Britain and Australia on this, but also it's on the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation website. Have a look at this. It says about small modular reactors, and SMR has a projected construction time of 3 to 5 years, while a large reactor takes 6 to 12 years. Now, Ted O'Brien's not denying here that, you know, it would take some years to set up a nuclear regulator first, but that's where he's getting that from, I guess. And he keeps talking about Ontario. They've announced a project involving 300 SMRs. Now, I revealed last week on Sky News, the coalition, when they announce their policy, will be looking at 5 or 6 sites. My understanding, Laura, is they are predominantly for SMRs, small modular reactors. Maybe there'll be one large reactor they're looking at. It's a contentious policy. They're going to get hammered over the fact there's not the workforce here, etc. But, gee, it's something exciting for us to talk about in the contest for the election, I have to say. Yep. The interesting part about this too in this interview, Ted O'Brien, is he indicated there'd be significant government funding for this. There'd have to be. It wouldn't just be the private sector funding it. And we know power generation in New South Wales and Victoria has been privatised. Who's paying for these if they happen? Because is it the federal government? Because a couple of the states have their power generation privatised. So do you see the federal government, under your plan, paying for part of or all of these nuclear power plants?
It doesn't matter what form of energy infrastructure you are looking at. The government does play a role. That's the case today. And it plays different roles. In some cases, in Snowy 2.0, for example, the government plays an ownership role. When you look at the rollout of industrial scale renewables, Labor has introduced the capacity investment scheme on top of the other schemes that are out there at the moment. And that'll be the case when it comes to zero emissions nuclear also.
Yeah, the cost blowouts are extraordinary on all energy projects. Look at Snowy Hydro 2.0. I spoke to Dave Littleproud about this, and he says, let the market decide, government get out of the way. But, I put to him as well, governments never get out of the way when it comes to energy policy. There's subsidies everywhere.
Which is what Ted O'Brien's saying there, right?
So it's the cost, right?
Yeah.
So it's the cost of how are they going to subsidise nuclear, to what end, who are these investors that they say are champing at the bit to get in Australia and build small-scale nuclear? And does some of that money come from what is being subsidised in the renewable sector? I mean, these are all complicated arguments that the coalition's going to have to come up with answers for sooner rather than later. Right?
Well, they're going to announce a policy between now and the budget reply speech of Peter Dutton in May, but it's easier to sell complicated arguments from government. I mean, well, frankly, it's hard enough to sell complicated arguments from government, but that's easier than doing it in opposition, and that's the real issue for them. Chris Bowen will be throwing his department at the newspapers and so forth with various bits of advice that this plan is impossible. That's the way it will head this debate over the next year or so.
Yeah, and I reckon there's a lot of taxpayers out there that simply don't believe any side when they say they're going to bring reliable and cheap energy, because it certainly hasn't happened. They see the opportunity as the unpopularity of this rollout of all these transmission lines, all this renewables, so they see the opening to go with this. But look, it's rolling the dice. There's no doubt about it politically. It certainly is. Andrew, thanks so much.